Welcome to the Reimagine podcast. Each week, give yourself 30 minutes and meet the people working hard to create the future of insurance today.
Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and this summer, NASA Reimagine hosted the first annual RetireTech Forum. And Laura, who came?
We had over 100 attendees representing industry decision makers, insurtechs, fintechs, and RetireTech startups that joined us not only in Hartford, Connecticut, but also virtually. So it was very exciting to see the group of individuals together.
You know, it was indeed. And you organized, was it 6 panel discussions? Six with over 25 speakers. That's right. And they took the stage at the forum and explored a number of very interesting issues, including sales and marketing, service and operations, product innovation, risk management, climate risk, and core advisor software. And today we're sharing session 5 on climate risk. And the title of the topic was Addressing Climate Change Through Annuities. Laura, that was a surprise for people.
It was a surprise in a lot of ways. I saw a tweet the other day that talked about millennials being strong because we're the first generation to know that we're all going to boil in the ocean, yet we come back to work to have these conversations. So not only did we touch on environmental climate risk, but what it means for insurers. Something, that stood out is the pressure that insurers are facing to stop underwriting fossil fuel businesses, for example, or how ESG can make its way into indices. So it's a newer conversation in this way, but it was very interesting. And we've actually had some follow-up activity due to this conversation from the event.
Yeah, I found it inspiring. I know Laura inspired a couple of people, at least one person on our team, to dig much deeper. And I think we'll have an even bigger collaboration with, the people at Insure, Charlie and company. And I think you'll also find some real interesting ideas tucked in here for new products and new companies. So I can't wait to see it. So what do I do? Flip the switch? I don't know. Push the button, Laura?
Turn on the solar panel.
Okay. All right. We'll do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Charlie, I'll introduce you to Charlie Sidoti. I'll let him talk to you about Insure and what he's doing in the Cambridge area, but been a great partner over the last couple of years. And he called me this was maybe a year ago, and he said, "Hey, Paul, you think there's a role for annuities in climate change?" I said, maybe. So with that, let me turn this over to you. And we'll guarantee you this will make you think a little differently about climate and what the power of the products we've been talking about.
Hi. Thank you, Paul and Laura. Thanks for the support. He said maybe last year. This year he said come to our meeting, and next year climate will be one of the 4 C's. That's our plan. So I'm going to introduce the panel, and it's a panel of 4, actually. We have people online that I think will be here.
Laura, I didn't realize virtual was an option.
Hey, you live here, don't you?
Okay.
So I'll just quickly introduce myself while we get the online people up and running. Charlie Sidoti, I'm the Executive Director of Insure. We are a nonprofit. Our mission is to catalyze a bold and decisive response to climate change by the insurance industry. Just quickly, my background, I have 25 years in the insurance industry, followed by 10 years running startups on insurance adjacent companies, and 3 years running a nonprofit, which is a totally different thing. Next, I'll introduce Josh, and certainly if you want to add anything, go right ahead. But many of you know Josh. Josh is an advisor and attorney, works on complicated regulatory issues, general counsel matters, and difficult issues related to fairness in AI and climate challenges. So he's going to help us talk a little bit about the regulatory environment around these. And it looks like we have Stephanie and Evan online, so I'll introduce them. Stephanie Simon is a corporate innovation leader with deep experience in both the insurance industry and financial products. She develops and manages, she has a lot of experience developing and managing startup ecosystems. And she's been working very closely with Insure to help us develop partnership opportunities and develop an ecosystem really focused on this intersection of climate, insurance, and innovation. And finally, certainly last but not least, Evan Greenfield has 20 years as an operator and investor in ESG. He was the global head of ESG for S&P, and he spent a lot of time and effort building and overseeing ESG and impact investing platforms. So that's the team. It's an honor to be with this team, and it's an honor to be here. Thanks again, Paul and Laura. I don't know if I can see those slides, but Stephanie, why don't you go to the next one? Okay, we introduced the team. So before we get into the panel discussion, I wanted to show at least this visual. We talk a lot about climate change. Go back to the Florida one, if you could. Thank you. We talk a lot about climate change and goals. The UN's sustainability goal is if we get to net carbon zero, which means the world is emitting no CO2 into the environment at all by 2050, that will keep the temperature increase to below 1.5 degrees centigrade by the year 2100. So that's the goal. We are not necessarily on track to meet the goal. We're more on track to have a 2.5 to a 4.5 increase in temperature. So those two pictures of Florida show what the coastline would look like if we have the one on the left is a 2-degree increase and the one on the right is a 4-degree increase. So although I am from the coast and, you know, the coastal people love the ESG stuff, a lot of this is built on a lot of science goes into it. And so there are real risks. It's more than just a regulatory issue and you know, a theoretical issue. And we are getting to the point where some of these things are starting to happen. You're starting to see the wildfires and the coastal and other issues. So I'll throw one more slide of stats at you, and then we'll kind of get into the other stuff. And I'm going to have to go over here a little bit just to see. So some of the stats between 2010 and 2020, it was the hottest decade in 125,000 years. So that, I think, is compelling. CO2 is the highest level in 2 million years. 1.2 trillion tons of sea ice melts annually, and that is accelerating. And one of the reasons it's accelerating as temperature increases, since industrialization, the oceans have absorbed CO2, making the impact less. The amount of CO2 that the oceans are absorbing is slowing. And at some point, as temperature increases, the oceans will start releasing CO2, which accelerates the temperature increase, which accelerates the release of CO2. So again, I don't want to terrify people, but it's a serious thing. And we're going to talk about the risks related to it, but also the opportunities, and specifically the opportunities for the insurance industry. One of the biggest ones is there's a $1.3 trillion protection gap, and it's growing. And what that is doing is pushing some of these risks onto individuals, enterprises, and the communities. That represents market opportunity. And I know some of that is what we've been talking about all day. How do you sell insurance? How do you get to the customer? How do you meet the customer where they are? But a lot of that is, a lot of the risks are related to climate risks. And just when we talk about climate risk, we really talk about 3 different risks. There's physical risk, which we all think about, you know, wind and weather changes, drought changes, wildfires are worse. Those affect physical assets. like, if your asset is in Miami and we hit those numbers where the Miami is offshore, those are physical damages to physical assets. And then the other risk is transition risk. So if you own chains of gas stations and the world does actually transition to a low carbon economy and everybody is driving electric vehicles, that's a risk that an operator of a gas station faces. And there's going to be lots of lawsuits around things like reporting, what action did you take, what action didn't you take. So there's all sorts of liability risks associated with that. And if you go to the next one, I'll kick it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Charlie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So as Charlie mentioned, my background's in the financial services sector and insurance, particularly in life and health and retirement. And so supplementing what you just heard about the overview of climate risk and climate change, just talking a little bit about climate risk and retirement specifically, which Paul teed up at the beginning. So according to a 2020 McKinsey study titled Climate Risk and Response, Physical Hazards and Socioeconomic Impacts, financial institutions and insurers should consider the role climate change will have on their portfolios. There are more studies coming out by asset managers and insurers that are identifying material risks to performance based on climate change. A report from Ernst & Young says the risks posed by stranded assets that unexpectedly lose value as a result of climate change, are rapidly climbing the investment industry's agenda. In March, the Securities and Exchange Commission proposed rules to enhance and standardize climate-related financial disclosure for U.S. companies, including information about climate-related risks that are reasonably likely to have a material impact on their business. You probably heard a lot about this because just in the last couple of days this week, there's been 2 articles in the Wall Street Journal from large companies and small businesses responding to this potential new requirement. In February, the Department of Labor, the DOL, issued a request for information, pretty wide-ranging, about the impact of climate-related financial risk on ERISA-covered retirement plans and individual retirement accounts. The DOL specifically asked whether any guaranteed lifetime income products, such as annuities, can help individuals efficiently mitigate the effects of at least some climate-related financial risk. And if so, what mitigation measures do these products take? By 2025, climate risk reporting will be mandatory across most UK businesses. These moves are part of a global shift towards mandatory climate-related financial disclosure, fueled by the need to quantify growing financial losses caused by climate volatility.
So let's bring the panel in here. And I do just want to comment on one thing Stephanie said. She talked about stranded assets. I think and somebody on one of the panels, the gentleman from Flint, talked about the broken promises. One thing that I think ties directly into retirement is people look at their home value as part of their retirement balance sheet and an important part. And the notion that property values are going to always go up is dramatically going to be changed by some of these climate risk issues, and it'll be different geographically. So from the individual annuity buyer, they're thinking that their annuity is part of this kind of portfolio of retirement assets. Home valuation changes are going to be dramatically different going forward. But with that, I do want to kind of bring Evan into the conversation. Evan, can you talk about how portfolio analysis, like where it's been, where it is, and where it's going from the perspective of climate risk?
Sure.
And how can carriers begin to analyze their investment portfolios to understand these risks? Yeah.
Thanks, Stephanie, for adding on the questions. Good afternoon, and I regret that I can't be in person in Hartford. Actually, around 40 years ago and 4 days from now, there was a seminal event in Hartford, Connecticut, such that I was born at Mount Sinai Hospital. So it is the city of my birth, and I certainly hold it dearly. Listen, there has been a seminal focus on ESG and climate transition and sustainability transition since the financial crisis of 2008, and certainly most recently since Q1 of 2020, which was, as we reflect back, the start of the pandemic. We are seeing significant flows of capital that are being integrated into ESG and sustainability related strategies for many of the reasons that Stephanie and Charlie just spoke of. This is a tremendous risk factor across the board for all systems, economies, societies, industries, certainly in the insurance side, both on P&C and life and health, but it's also a tremendous opportunity. And the question is to where in an organization do we want to play? There's great innovation that's transpiring really at a moment's notice, but we see huge flows of capital that are emanating to look at climate-related risk. We're seeing a whole different purchasing pattern from corporates that are looking to purchase from companies that are more sustainability integrated and are focused more on climate transition. Case in point, yesterday, Deutsche Bank announced that any supplier providing greater than $500,000 of services to the firm will have to have a certain sustainability ranking. We see that on the direct-to-consumer side as well, and we see that in government purchases. As pointed out earlier, we're seeing regulatory regimes here in the States. We saw Gary Gensler's proposal last month in terms of climate exposure and climate disclosure from publicly traded companies. We're seeing a lot of activity in the European Union, seeing activity in Asia, certainly in China. We're even seeing pressure from rating agencies that are being put upon companies in terms of impacting their cost of capital. Last year, about a fourth of rating downgrades from the large credit rating firms were attributable to material ESG factors. So there's a clear linkage to financial performance and to financial returns. And as we discussed, we're seeing a great amount of innovation that's happening, maybe not directly related to the insurance industry, but look at, the path to electric vehicles and what Tesla has developed. 5 years ago, there was very far and few in between of traditional automobile manufacturers that had a clear path to electrification. Today, everyone does. I mean, that was a really rapid progression that has been quite considerable. From the insurance side, it's impacting everything from underwriting to managing assets, managing duration and liability and asset matching. This all needs to take into consideration transition to a low carbon economy. As Charlie said, we're heading to a really terribly dangerous path that hasn't been seen before in human history. There will be repercussions throughout, and these repercussions will affect everybody in the room, both personally and business-wise. And I believe that there's an opportunity we can further discuss to capitalize on this and to see it from an economic standpoint.
Thank you, Evan. Evan, can you talk a little bit more how the sophistication of the portfolio analysis has evolved from filtering out the bad actors to a more sophisticated approach?
Yeah, sure, certainly. And there is a cross-section, and I know we're focused on climate transition, but we can look at this overall as it pertains to ESG and sustainability. But there has been an evolution. I've been involved in it for the last dozen or so years, both on the investing side, but most recently on the data and analytics side. We're having much greater intelligence from ESG data and analytics and climate data and analytics that allows portfolio managers and analysts to integrate sustainability as a core part of their investment process, both on the selection side of the equation and screening, the diligence, the monitoring and engagement, and the eventual exit from these companies. We're seeing that both in public market portfolios and private market portfolios. We're seeing it across the board, whether it be indices to sophisticated alternative asset management instruments. We are at a challenging time, though, in the respect you all may have heard of this aspect that there's great correlation amongst the credit rating firms in terms of a credit rating. You go to S&P or Moody's or Fitch, generally going to have a very similar rating from those three firms. You have a tremendous lack of correlation amongst the major ESG rating firms as it pertains to their ratings. You can have a very different rating from MSCI on the same company relative to Sustainalytics owned by Morningstar relative to S&P Global. That creates a lot of confusion and noise in the market. But keep this in mind, we're still at a very early part of this evolution and this trajectory to a low carbon economy. If we look at a similar analog to the establishment of US GAAP after the Great Depression, that evolved over decades. So we're still in the earlier stages, but we really need to enhance and evolve the data and analytics to allow folks like yourselves to integrate it into your models, to have some meaningful signals to it that could give you some type of advantage to understand what returns look like, risk looks like, opportunities, et cetera.
Cool, thank you. Let's move to Josh, and could you give us a little bit of perspective how the regulators are kind of viewing and approaching these issues?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Laura and Paul, for inviting me and putting me in this panel, even though I no longer have any real value in what I'm saying.
Not true, not true.
But I will say that there's enough of a tail on my previous job. I was the deputy commissioner at the Connecticut Insurance Department, and that just ended in May. And I do think that, I think from the regulator's perspective, there's a lot of things going on. It's really twofold. It starts with what the companies are investing in, and there always is this little dialogue whether or not regulators should get in the mix and say, well, certain class of investments should not include things that might negatively impact the climate. And the direction that the regulators really trend, although there always is conversation, is as long as the SVO and the chief financial regulator in the jurisdiction agree that it meets the class of investment, they don't really care what that investment is in. And I don't see that changing. It's not the regulator's job to determine what a company should be invested in. The job of the regulator, as Barbara kind of mentioned, is to protect consumers. And protecting consumers at its core is to make sure a company is solvent. Because if a company can't pay out its claim, which is the ultimate sort of consumer responsibility, company responsibility for the consumer, then what good is the company, and then what good is the regulator? So the job of the regulator is really to make sure an investment opportunity meets the standard required by the statutes and regs in that jurisdiction, not to pick each individual different type of investment. However, it is also the job of the regulator to understand the solvency of a company. And if a company is heavily invested in things that might be impacted in a massive way by climate, it's important that the regulator knows that. So that's why in April of this year of 2022, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners transitioned their reporting. It's not TCFD, they have their own reporting, but they transitioned it to something that is very similar to TCFD. So it allows for carriers to say, okay, if I did TCFD, which a lot of large carriers are required to, then I am now compliant with what the states are asking us to file. And there are some discrepancies, so there is additional language that needs to be filed by the carriers, but on its face, it really outlines the risk exposure, and it lets the regulator understand the risk exposure that a carrier has in the climate space. So the disclosures are really important, and TCFD was the G7, I think, adopted that in 2021, but I think it's slowly coming across most of Europe, and I know it's in a lot of European countries now. So I think that disclosures is the only way to go at this point for regulators so that they can understand the risk. And although not all states are on board, I think it's only 14 states that agreed to participate in this disclosure requirement. That's the flaw of the 56 jurisdiction regulatory scheme that exists in the United States. However, those 14 states happen to represent 80% of the marketplace. So it's disproportionately impacting the majority of the insurance market.
Awesome, thank you. I think we're going to transition now to the the next slide and start talking about some of the opportunities. And Stephanie, are you going to run this one? Is that right?
Sure. What are some potential novel ideas in the annuity space where we could be thinking about climate-focused annuities, some novel ideas for annuities that could both meet or preserve retirement savings as well as address climate risk? So we've given some thought to this. We'll share a few starter ideas. We would love to hear yours as well. And Josh and Evan will have an opportunity to comment and share their thoughts. So the first one, just from a low-hanging fruit perspective, there's been a significant increase in demand for socially responsible financial products. I know Evan spoke to that earlier. The growth of ESG has been tremendous. So the suggestion here is to create ESG annuities with an emphasis on de-risking retirement portfolios by reducing exposure to environmental risks and potentially increasing exposure to companies with solutions to reduce carbon in the atmosphere. This would potentially provide customers with more investment transparency and choice. And there's a quote here from S&P Global Insurance Talk. We strongly believe that in just a few years, most carriers in the insurance space will have an ESG offering to answer clients' growing demand, led by various demographic segments that see it as a must-have. And the quote goes on from there. One example is from BlackRock, which is on the slide here with Midland National. They have a fixed indexed ESG annuity product. There are a few others in the market. I didn't see a ton out there, but that's one example. And I'm going to go to the second bullet and then I'll pause. I want to talk about green annuities. So it's a related concept idea, green annuities and ESG. Instead of the broad-based ESG, environmental, social, and governance criteria, specifically offering an environmentally focused annuity product, a green annuity, where a portion or percentage of the investments made by the insurer are in green and or blue bonds. And if you're not familiar with those terms, green bonds are financial instruments designed to support environmental and climate-related projects, and blue bonds, which is a relatively new form, is a sustainability bond, which is a debt instrument used to support investments in marine and ocean projects. Let's just say that Stephanie's had a very large learning curve in 2022 about climate coming from healthcare and financial services. So enough said there. Thoughts on ESG annuities or green annuities, Evan or Josh or Charlie or others?
I'll just add, I think there's huge opportunity and you know, the discussion, the way Paul kind of set up this, when he introduced us was, I'm not sure where the annuity piece fits, but we absolutely think there's opportunity to innovate. We're not exactly sure where, but we want to engage with people from the industry like yourselves to say that there's opportunities on the asset side, which Evan was talking about, and there's opportunities we think on the product side around helping the customers understand these risks, because these are significant risks ultimately to individuals and enterprises in the communities. And, you know, we think annuities are part of that. And we're trying to think about ways you can hedge those risks, where you can create products that help the customers offset the risks that they don't really even completely understand yet. And much of the industry doesn't completely understand. So we want to start that dialogue. We'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about.
Well, Stephanie, if I'm jumping ahead, then please tell me not to. But on the asset side, impact investing is a big deal, and I think Evan might talk a little bit more about this too. I'm not sure, but anyway, one of the things that's going on with all the different jurisdictions, they're trying to come together to figure out a way to allow for impact investing to not be counted against risk-based capital. So to allow carriers to use their risk-based capital for some of these more untraditional investment opportunities, mostly around, a lot of the conversation is really around low-income housing, because there's long history there, and it might be able to be, that might be a similar class as a required class of investing for risk-based capital standards. I think one of the other areas that they should be focusing on is climate. They should allow for there to be conversations on risk-based capital being utilized for some climate initiatives that there's history and there's experience in, and that you can show that the risk is very similar to the to the required standard investment for risk-based capital. So, and that's an ongoing conversation that's taking place. There's so much, to have an annuity, to have life insurance, to have these businesses, there's so much capital that is required to be sitting. And that capital has to be invested in such a particular way, and to open the capital opportunity, to open the investment opportunities to capital or to investments in climate-related things, I think could really change the way money, the way some of these opportunities are funded.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead.
Can I just say one quick thing? I think when we think of climate transition, we think of these capital-intensive, scientifically risky technology, risky projects, and things like carbon capture and sequestration. We need investment and we need focus on that because we are not going to solve this challenge by just the business as usual approach. But those are a little more riskier assets and approaches. But there is an ancillary industry building along sustainability services or climate services, those companies that are helping with the mitigation and adaptation that are not as technology risky as a climate capture and sequestration firm. So there's across the board opportunities. And one last point, it always baffled me years ago in the Obama administration where we saw the DOL ruling as it pertains to ERISA plans, and then we saw it rescinded in the Trump administration, now we see it back. And I don't know why there's such political ideology on climate. The planet doesn't really care about politics the last time I checked. But here's the deal, is that if you want to be a good fiduciary, you should be certainly integrating in these climate transition topics into your portfolios, or you're actually not fulfilling your fiduciary obligation. Because again, this is the most significant economic crisis and opportunity in modern economic history. If you don't integrate it in, you're not fulfilling your role and responsibilities.
Yeah, Evan, that's a good point. And I'd just like to add on a little bit to that. When resiliency is such a huge piece of this. And I think Insure is working on a huge resiliency. And I think that there might be some interesting opportunities where you can capitalize on some sitting RBC capital to invest in some resiliency things, which we know resiliency isn't really a risk. It's just a way of doing things different and better for climate.
Absolutely. I'll just add to that too. A lot of these opportunities are very good investments, and there's also second and third order returns. If you're investing in bonds, that's investing in resilient projects that make the community safer. A lot of these climate issues are risks on the property casualty side, but also especially to those vulnerable populations that Josh talked about. So they create returns beyond the direct returns of the investment. And if the insurance industry is kind of thinking beyond, not ignoring the core investment, but also thinking about these second and third order returns of investing in the resilience of individuals, enterprises, and communities, there's a huge opportunity to not just manage risk, but capture opportunity. And I know I saw a couple of questions. Who wants to go? Wildfire.
Yellowstone,
Yeah.
Wyoming, a lot of areas that are far inland.
Okay. I mean, it is dramatically, it is different region to region. And I think we have some slides at the end about a few startups. You know, people are building models now to get very sophisticated to measure the differences on how will like home values vary in, you know, 5, 10, 25 years down to specific parcels. And then roll that up at a portfolio level. Like the notion that physical assets, buildings, are going to increase in value the way they historically have is just wrong. And there's real political challenges too. The state of California started offering people to buy their assets and say, you know, we want to migrate people out of Pacifica because 1 or 2 homes are falling into the ocean now, and it's only going to get worse, and we need to do kind of a planned migration. And people fought it because they were saying, well, no, you can't say that our homes are going to fall into the ocean because that will affect our asset values. But it's like this crazy argument that says, but your asset values will ultimately go to zero because we know, and it's already starting, homes are falling into the ocean. So I think part of it is the technology, which people are working on. How do you measure those regional differences? But also part of it is the mental, how do we wrap our head around that, whether it's kind of the oil industry assets and coal assets are going to go to zero, or my house in Miami or Key West is going to go to zero. So there's a number of challenges there around that. And we're grappling with it, like Evan said, where money's going into it, attention's going into it, people are starting to report on it. So there's a lot of work to be done, but we're running out of time.
Well, I, unlike Charlie, do not have a house in Key West, but I will say that in Guilford, Connecticut, so if we're talking regionally, it gets even more, it's local. In Guilford, Connecticut, there was a town plan that was passed that said up until this one road, we assume in 2080, it's going to be underwater. And you know, half the town came out and said, oh my God, this is horrible. How can you do this? You know, our house, who's going to buy my house if this plan went into effect? And the plan did go into effect in 2015. And I don't think it impacted property values at all. But building codes, the requirements that each community has, we have standard state-based building codes, but beyond that, each community can set their own building code requirements on top of that. And you have some, you know, Florida does a phenomenal job with the way that they require people to build houses. There's some amazing building code examples across the country, but Connecticut is a little bit behind on that. And not that you know, that's really not a part of this conversation, but to the point of there being issues, you know, town by town all across the country. And the issues are different, and it's going to be very difficult to unwind.
Go ahead.
The aviation industry is going through a transition. Propulsion propellers, jets, now we're having electric aviation. Within that segment, we have the government regulatory body nudging money. There's no nudging the industry to move from low lead to no lead. My point is, why not use that instrument? Not regulate the thing, but nudge them to go forward. Be optimistic.
No, that's a really good point. And I think it's the consumer's job to participate in that nudge. I think consumers are starting to demand that they know, like one of the biggest negative feedbacks we received from large carriers on the, not we, but the Connecticut Insurance Department received from large carriers on the reporting is, well, we don't want there to be naming and shaming. We don't want the consumers to come out and say, well, hold on a second. We see that this one large company is only invested in oil and this other company is invested in, you know, all these great funds that help society be a better place. Why is that? And so carriers, that will be a part of this disclosure. I don't think the goal of disclosure is to name and shame, but I do think it will end up nudging carriers because they're going to be less likely to want to disclose that, you know, they have some possibly nefarious investments.
And I think the flip side of the name and shame, which I love that term, is there's opportunity. And I think about my kids who are like 20 years old. They don't think much about annuities, which is probably because I didn't educate them at 12 about compound interest. But I think there's an opportunity to wrap annuities in these kind of ESG and green that, you know, I think about my kids, how that would get them in potentially interested in. How does this work? Oh, we're investing in money going to things like that, which is a different kind of nudge. You know, it's pulling. But I saw another question up here. The scope of the change that is going to happen, whether you believe it or not, it's going to happen, is so big that I hate to say it's theirs or theirs or theirs. It really is like all of these things need to come together. And really, like the next 10 years, it's not we talk about 2050, net carbon zero at 2050. You can't get to net carbon zero at 2050. And we're literally running out of time. Like things need to start changing now. And you know, Evan was talking about things are accelerating. We're not where we need to be, but it really is kind of meetings like this, getting people to think about it and start working together to figure some of these things out.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking with Butch from the Sustainable Insurance Forum, and it's already done. I mean, his mind is where the world is just ending. So I think that
I'm not that negative yet.
I mean, having, I think your point is, I don't think that your point is bad. I think it's good. I think that we have to be doing every component of this to make it as palatable as possible over the next 20, 30 years and get a lot of air conditioning.
We're going to increase our payout. I'm not sure. I apologize. I can't see the room so well.
I think you might be required to.
Can I make a quick?
Go ahead.
How are we doing on time?
We have just a couple minutes, so we have a little bit more to get through, but go ahead, Evan, and then I'll finish up this slide.
Yeah, just a very quick point on that earlier question as it relates to the opportunity, the knowledge. This is hard stuff in many respects. I've been involved in this movement for a dozen years, and you take for granted what you know, and you kind of have an approach that everybody knows what you know. This is emerging, and it does like very suddenly. We've seen trillions of dollars worth of capital market firms making commitments to net zero in the last 2 years. And if you discuss with most folks in an organization the concepts of ESG and sustainability and climate transition, it's not well educated. There is a lack of training. It's forums like this, but there needs to be much greater expertise that's disseminated throughout the whole organization, not just in the sustainability department. And to have that conversation, I think Charlie mentioned earlier, this could be a driver, right, of getting additional customers and economic return. And we see this next generation that is very focused on these issues. But it's not only just this next generation, right? I speak to, a generation that's a little bit older than myself, and they're focused on this, but that education is still missing. And so we need to do a better job evangelizing for forums like this, not just the sustainability focused forums, but forums of just folks that are saying, I hear a lot about this. What is it? How do I capitalize on it? And how do I build this out?
Yeah, thank you, Evan, and thank you for participating on the panel today. I am a corporate innovator, and I've redirected my career to this work because I think it's so important and it's so exciting to be able to speak to you about it. The last idea I want to share on the innovation side, I want to bring Paul Tyler up wherever he is back there to thank him for this idea. That was really one of the prompters of this whole session. So I wanted to honor that idea around annuities to support just transition, and this was something Paul had researched. These are annuities that are not geared towards retirement. It's a different use of an annuity product, but it's to provide a transition for workers away from coal and other carbon-emitting energy sectors. So offer an annuity-like financial product that would provide a steady stream payout for a fixed time period to ease and encourage transition to other employment. There's going to be a tremendous amount of other employment if we actually do the work that we need to do. There's a lot of new sectors created, new jobs created to meet our climate goals. So, and others can speak to that better than me, but this would be more like a public-private funding partnership. The World Bank is certainly involved in these just transition programs. There's an organization called the Just Transition Fund, which focuses on this. I found Manulife actually is a company it's written on the just transitions, taking it very seriously. So this might be more of a play from the community investment side of a carrier to get involved in just transition programs and use and design these annuity instruments to help. Just one thought there. So Paul, if you want to add anything, please do. I can't see you, but I know you're there.
He said he's good, and I know we're short
on time.
So
okay.
Let me wrap it up. Can you go to the next one? Just quickly, we're super happy to be here. Insure, if anybody's interested in these issues, we're always looking for kind of partners to work with us. There's a lot of different ways you can work with us. We think the insurance industry is all about risk and should be running towards risk and figuring out how to do this. And we know it's a property casualty issue, but it's also on this side as well. And there's both opportunity here and risk. So thank you all. And
thank you.
We'll wrap it up.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information about this company and other great startups at imagine.nfg.com.